right, so welcome to the Corpus Christi Songwriter Podcast. I'm Jules.
I'm Jimmy.
And I'm Buddy.
Hey, we got Buddy Mondlock with us today. I'm going to let Jimmy guide this conversation forward. Jimmy, you got questions for Buddy. I just started looking this guy up online, and whoa, man, I mean, I'm going to let you guide it, and then at some point, we have to talk about, like, the process of you writing The Dark with Guy, and I'd love to talk about the Canary song at some point, too. To really, it was funny. It's like my girlfriend called me right before this, and I was like, this guy co-wrote The Dark, man. So, Anyway, so Jimmy, I'll let you take it from this
I
one.
love that you're going to hand it over to me, and then you just started.
I tell you I'm going to hand it over. I never do. And then,
But yeah, Buddy, I met you actually through a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Bobby Carter, several years ago. Who recently passed away. I believe it was the year before last. But yeah, and he just had the utmost respect for you.
And likewise, too.
Yeah.
Bobby was a really good friend to me.
Anytime he could, he would bring up Buddy Mondlock and just how amazing he thought your songs were. So I'm really honored to be able to have this time with you, and also to have you as one of our headliners for the festival. You and Michael McNevin will actually be closing down the entire thing on Sunday, February 17th, and we're really excited about that. But yeah, for the listener that may not know all your accolades, give us the brief rundown on who Buddy Mondlock is.
I'm a folk singer and songwriter from Chicago originally, and I've been down here in Nashville for, almost 35 years now, something like that. Yeah, and I kind of cut my teeth listening to people like John Prine and Steve Goodman, and actually got to open for Goodman once at the Earl of Old Town when he came back to do his New Year's Eve shows every year. I was 22, I think, or 21 maybe, and I've just, I thought, all right, this is great. I want to keep doing this as long as I can. And then I ended up meeting Guy Clark at the Kerrville Folk Festival. Very first time there. Guy was hosting the Balladry that day, which is just an open stage. Basically, anybody could sign up. And I eventually got around to me toward the end there, and I played a song called No Choice. And after the whole thing was over, he just walked up to me and said, hey, I like that tune. You got a tape of it? And when I, kind of regained my power of speech, I said, don't move. That's my tent right over there. I'm going to run and get you a tape. So I did, and I just thought, that's amazing that just happened to me. But it wasn't over, because a couple of weeks later, I was back in my little apartment in Chicago, and my message light was blinking in the kitchen, and I hit play and said, hey, Bud, this is Guy Clark in Nashville. Give me a call sometime. So I called him right away. We talked for a little bit, and he just said, finally, well, Buddy, what do you want to do? I didn't think about it too long. I just said, well, Guy, I just want to keep writing songs and making music and try and make a living out of it somehow. And he said, okay, let's see if we can get you in the music business. And he proceeded to do exactly that. He started making copies of my tapes and passing them around to people. And next thing I knew, I'd be getting a call from Jim Rooney, who had produced some of my favorite John Prine records. And, Jim's like, I'm going to be in Chicago. You want to go to a Cubs game together? And, like the world changed, basically. So within a year or so, I was moving down here to Nashville, and through Guy, I had met Bob Doyle, who was working at ASCAP at the time, and he eventually left ASCAP to manage me and this other kid who wandered into his office named Garth Brooks. So it kind of went on from there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
From there, what were the next steps? Did you record an album? Was it just working with you as an artist, kind of sculpting you, or it's basically back to my first question. What was the next step?
What was next? Yeah. Well, I had made, right before I left Chicago, I made a record with the folks I've been playing with there, Laura Wasserman at the time, who now you know her as Laura Hall, she's the keyboard player on Whose Line Is It Anyway? She ended up in L.A. later on. And Mike Lindauer, who still plays with me. He's a wonderful bass player, although he won't be there in Corpus this time. It'll just be me and Mike McNevin playing songs this time. But so I'd made that record, and I started, when I moved to Nashville, I started meeting musicians here, including Dave Pomeroy and Sam Bacco and Barry Walsh. And that was kind of the core of my band. When I played out, I used those guys couple years after I got here, we recorded an album. By then I was signed to, I guess when I met the guys, it was CBS Songs, the publishing company. That's where Guy was writing. They seemed interested. So when I got here, they offered a contract. By that time, they'd been bought by SBK. So it was SBK Songs. And then by the time I left that publishing deal a couple of years later, they'd been bought by EMI. So that was kind of a Nashville tale there. But anyway, Bob Doyle and Pam Lewis, who were my co-managers, seemed like they'd gotten a deal for me on Capitol. That's where Garth was. And they kind of cornered Jimmy Bowen one night and got him to agree to sign me. But right before we were getting ready to make the record and sign the contract, I found out that the guy that really was my point guy at Capitol was getting transferred to the gospel division. So I had no idea who I'd be working with. I knew Bowen wasn't really all that into it.
Yeah.
He kind of just did it to appease Bob and Pam, I think, who were managing his biggest artist at the time, Garth.
Right.
So we decided not to sign the deal, but I went ahead and made the record anyway with Bob and Pam's blessing, and they funded the project. That was an amazing experience because I really got to do sort of a full-fledged Nashville studio album. But Steve Adabo came from New York to produce it, and we used a lot of Nashville players like the guys that I named, my core band, and Kenny Malone and folks like that, Larry Cheney on guitar, and some other folks. And we kind of put it out there. We shopped it a bit. It got picked up by an Irish label, actually. And that was the beginning of my love affair with Ireland. I went over there to promote the record and do a few gigs. I got on a TV show. It was kind of their version of the Tonight Show.
Cool.
Yeah, it was kind of amazing to suddenly be in that world, even though it was Ireland instead of the U.S. For me, that kind of made it even more romantic, and I just loved the place. Interestingly enough, that television appearance, which was sort of my big coming out there, my introduction, happened to be the day after Ireland had won the Eurovision contest. It's a huge, music contest in Europe. And it was published. It was took place in Ireland, and part of their presentation was this thing called River Dance. So that was the introduction to the world of river dance, this phenomenon, and they'd won the contest. So the same night that Mike and I were on there playing our song, they had the two principal dancers from Riverdance and also the two singers of the Irish, Eurovision winning song. So we were not the ones who got the most attention, I'd say, that night. But it was still great. And I think it made enough of a splash that I got enough fans to kind of keep going back there, even after the sort of the hubbub of the record died down a bit. I just kept going back and doing a tour every year. And I've been pretty much doing that ever since.
That's amazing. I want to know a little bit about Coming Down in the Rain. That's, I guess, one of your most recognizable songs.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's funny. I mentioned Jim Rooney earlier, and of course I looked him up when I got here to Nashville and got to be pals of a sort who knew each other anyway. And I happened to run into him one day, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be working with Nanci again, Nanci Griffith, and this time she's going to do songs that she didn't write. Do you have anything to pitch for her?" I'm like, "Oh, wow. Well, I just wrote this one." And I thought it was kind of a country song, but my publisher said, "Well, hey, that's kind of folky, ain't it?" So I thought, well, I'll pitch that one. And I had actually played it on a taping of an Irish TV show that had been recorded in Nashville at the Bluebird, and Nanci had hosted it. So I knew she'd heard the song before.
Right. It's one of the reasons I brought that up, because when I was doing some research on you, I found that taping of that, and it's a beautiful song. But I love that performance, and the fact that Nanci was there. That just
Well, and the other guy on that taping was this other new songwriter named Robert Earl Keane.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've seen the video, so you got to see my early '90s haircut there too. So she ended up recording that. Rooney pitched it to her, and she remembered it and liked it, and that was huge for me. I mean, like other people on that record were John Prine and geez, who else? Guy was on there. I think Odetta was on there, and a bunch of other, kind of songs by Towns and Bob Dylan, and it was amazing to be the new kid and be included on something like that.
Right. So out of everything that you've accomplished over the past several decades, what stands as like the shining achievement for you?
Oh, that's a hard one. I guess, maybe the fact that I got to write with Guy Clark, who really was my hero, and then had Guy record, the two songs that we'd written at that point on his record. And actually one of the songs became the title song of the record, The Dark. Mm-hmm. That was actually the first thing we sat down to write. And, I got here in '88, and it took me like 10 or 12 years or more to get up the nerve to actually ask Guy to write with me.
What was that moment like?
Well, I just happened to run into him like in the vegetable aisle at Kroger, at the grocery store.
Perfect.
And as happens, yeah. And we started talking, and I said, "Hey, Guy, do you think maybe you want to write a song together sometime?" And he just said, "Yeah, sure. Call me up. We'll find a day." There we were, a couple of weeks later in his little studio workshop down in the basement of his house, where he built guitars and had this old plywood table that he made, and picture of Townes Van Zandt up on the wall glaring down at me. And I'd had just like sort of a series of images that, just the night before, I just tried to brainstorm some stuff so I could have something to bring into the session, and I was laying in bed trying to think of what to write. So I just wrote about what was going through my head as I'm laying in bed there. So, in the dark, you can sometimes hear your own heartbeat or the heart of the one next to you. I think I had those lines. I just read that stuff off to Guy, and we just started riffing on that. And, by the end of the day, we had just sort of scribbles all over the paper of different things. You were just brainstorming about the dark and different images about the dark and things that you see in the dark and what it means. And we still didn't have any kind of a melody to sing it to. I had been playing some chords on the guitar. So we got sort of to the end of the day. We're both getting tired and running out of ideas. And Guy said, "Tell you what, why don't you just play those chords and just read what we got on the paper there? Just I'll record it, and we'll just get it down, what we have so far anyway." So I did, and we listened back to it, and we both looked at each other, and it's like, I think we're done. It didn't really need a melody. It just was perfect the way it was.
Wow.
Nearly so. Guy actually did a little bit of editing on it after I left that day. Yeah, sure enough, a year later, it was on his record, The Dark.
Wow. That's
In the meantime, we had also written this other song called Mud.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Bobby. Bobby Carter used to sing that one at his gigs. He learned it after that record came out, and my version of it later on. And when I got here, it was like when I got to Corpus, after being away for a while, I'd be at one of Bobby's gigs sitting in it, like everybody knew Mud. As soon as Bobby started playing it, they were all singing along. It was amazing.
That was one of the first songs of yours, I guess I heard, like, through Bobby Carter.
Uh-huh. Yeah. He did a great version of it, too. He really made it his own.
Did he also cover the Canary song? Was that one that he covered?
I'm not sure if he did or not. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think I got to hear him do that one, but yeah.
I believe that was another one that I remember him performing.
Cool. Yeah. And I got to know Bobby because I was married at the time to Carol Elliott, a great songwriter. We'd been touring together in Texas. The last gig of that tour was in Corpus, and Bobby ran sound for us there at the Executive Surf Club.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, how Bobby is. He's just really friendly guy and really easy to get to know and such great enthusiasm. So I think we asked him or somebody, where should we go stay? I wanted to do some birding while I was there. I'm a bird watcher. And he goes, oh, try Port Aransas. And we looked it up, and we had a dog with us, our dog Buddy, and we found this little condo where they accepted pets. And eventually we ended up buying this little condo that we'd stayed in down there. It was for sale. And so we moved there part-time. Anyway, we spent part of our time in Corpus and part in Nashville. And whenever it was Corpus, I'd always go hang out with Bobby, go see him play at the Blackbeards or somewhere else. And,
Right.
he started inviting me to do gigs with him and stuff, or just come up and do a few songs when he was playing, or fill in for him once in a while if he had something else going on.
Yeah, I remember I think the last time I saw you before his memorial was at Blackbeard's when it was a special night with Buddy Mondlock, and he invited my family out and a couple other songwriters out to come see you perform. And I think he invited me up to play a couple songs as well. And so I love that opportunity. And Bobby was always like that.
Oh,
so.
yeah, I remember that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was at Blackbeard's. And I had been in Texas doing some shows and came down to Corpus. I wasn't, didn't have the condo there anymore.
Right.
But I always kept staying in touch whenever I'd be in Texas. If I had a few days off, I'd go down to Corpus and hang with Bobby.
Yeah. Well, we love getting into the craft of songwriting, and I'd love to really dive into that with you. Do you have any specific questions, Jules?
I mean, I was probably going to ask questions about songwriting, and the craft
Right.
and how he builds it and stuff. But I guess what's kind of, and forgive me, because I'm still trying to thread or weave these threads in my mind together as I present this question that I don't even know if I can formulate accurately. But I would say that when you mentioned that you also co-wrote Mud, I was unaware of that, but I had always felt the beginning of the album, Dark, it starts with Mud, and the ending of that album, Dark, were very interrelated. From like a perspective that's it's like a vantage point you find not by searching for it, in that you brought these thoughts that were just your mind, sort of these things that came across your head, and you put them down on paper. And I feel like, when you wrote that down, it seemed kind of an inconsequential thing. Maybe it was like you wrote it down to save it, but I don't know that you were looking at that particular line being like the generative line that might lead towards a full song, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And then also, but then the concept of mud being like such an overlooked detail, to where you've just taken the smallest detail and just expanded it out to like the biggest imagery for the listener. I notice you doing these things in your writing. So I'm just wondering, like, how you get to that point to...
Well, it's really perceptive that you picked up on it that way. Because, like, here I'm in Nashville, where a lot of songs start with the title, right?
Yeah.
People have lists of titles in their notebooks, and, they read them off to each other as they're doing a co-write. And someone says, yeah, let's write that one. And the whole song is in the title. It's sort of just fleshing it out sometimes. For me, again, with Mud, I knew I was going to be writing with Guy the next day. I went walking around, and there was this creek across the street and down a little ways from my house. So I often would go down there to kind of be by myself and think. And I'm just writing down images of what's around me, the way the sun's coming through the trees and what I'm looking at. The heron is in there because I'm a bird watcher. And so I'm just writing about the creek and the banks, the muddy banks, just trying to get some imagery down. That's all it was. And brought that into Guy again, and we just kind of took off from there. I just had that stuff. I think I originally thought it was going to be a moodier song. It's pretty moody as it is anyway. Yeah. As soon as Guy got his teeth into it, that's where the chorus came from. It's like mud pie, mud you rye, mud on a snake bite, don't you die. That's total Guy there,
Yeah. It's like salty, sort of like, I hear that, and I wasn't aware that he co-wrote that stuff. Because when you listen to this stuff, you just kind of take it in. It is under the artist name. But now that you mention that is such a signature sort of Guy sentiment in a way, Yeah, I mean, when you start to write these lines down, it seems like in both cases, whether you're laying in bed or you're walking through the bank, which I spent 10 years in Nashville. And so like those fall days when the color saturation of the foliage is just trying to peak, when it's wet outside and kind of cold, like I have always envisioned that kind of like riverbank, in that song. Yeah. But anyway, so like both perspectives, whether you're laying in bed and you're writing this down or whether you're taking a walk and you're finding just the imagery that's out there. I think it's quite profound how the sort of poetic meat of this entire entree is found in the smallest details that you seem to be in search of. And I really, wow. Yeah.
Well, to me, it's all about the details, People, I think, tend to think that they have to have this grand idea and this grand message in their song. And if you start with that notion, to me, lots of times the song just ends up kind of sounding generic. We hear the grand ideas all the time. I'd rather get to it by the back door and let the grand idea be in the head of the listener and not on the lips of the singer.
Right.
So for me, the imagery is really where it's all at. And the imagery is all about the little details. You just got to pick out the details that speak to whatever your underlying feeling is about what you're writing about. If you're telling a story or trying to get across a feeling or a moment in a relationship or whatever, And Guy was so brilliant at that. I mean, I remember the first time I heard him was in Chicago, heard him live at a club called Holstein's. And he played that song, I'm spacing on the title, but there's this line, like an old gray cat in winter staying close to him. That old time feeling, that's the name of the song. When I heard him say that, like an old gray cat in winter, keep him close to the wall. Oh my God, no one has ever said that in a song and used it as a simile before, but as far as I know, but geez, I sure get a powerful feeling thinking about that line, and I'm right there with it. And it's just this little moment that you might miss, except Guy didn't miss it. He could see things like that and knew just where to place them so that it would hit you like a ton of bricks, the quiet little thing.
Yeah, so like I think I might have mentioned this aspect of a writer that I admire. Like Jason Isbell, like once an album has a tendency to rhyme a 5-letter substance in one of his, And for listeners, like, it's wild how like he'll just be there talking about a small town and all of a sudden he rhymes like methamphetamine or something like that. And those speak to like, those are more ostentatious, smaller moments, in a song, I feel like a bigger example of kind of the magic of what Guy did, which was in like sort of the subtlety.
Yeah, what he's doing there, I think, and some of the best songwriters do this. He's playing with the language. He knows what he's writing about for sure, and it can be some gritty stuff. But he's also his intelligence is shining through. That when you rhyme methamphetamine, those little smart things get your attention. It's so hard to keep people's attention these days, and you do something like that, and they're like, "Whoa, wow, did that just happen?" They're right back in the moment with you in the song.
Right. There's got to be a love for language if you're going to write songs, right? Or at least,
yeah.
Well, it's like Hemingway's whiskey stuff, I mean, it's like just, I don't know. I feel like even when someone like Hayes Carl says something like, you ain't a poet, you're a drunk with a pen. It's like, I feel like we're all kind of in love with language in a way. And it's, I don't know, man. This is neither here nor there in kind of a field, man. But like someone like Dante, who insisted that poetry was the best communicator of the human condition as opposed to like philosophy. There are times when I listen to other songwriters, it's like, we're all just a bunch of fucking poets, man. Let's just, like we're all playing guitars and singing, but at our core, what we are just the lovers of language that insist on creating beauty out of thin air through just, I don't know, man. But talking with you about this stuff is really, just from the vantage points that I'm hearing from you, the substantive sort of like the lyrical impact of the things that you've worked on for me have been sort of instructive, instrumental, and sort of like the part of the standard. I mentioned in a different podcast about how you reserve the most beautiful melody for the most horrific thing you have to say. And these are as close, if I had to point out to people how this is done, these are some of the examples that I would point to. It's very cool, man. Yeah.
I love that. I love what you said about Dante saying poetry is the best form of communication. Because thinking about that, the philosophers are trying their best to define whatever this idea is that they've come across, and to get more and more precise about it in some ways. Whereas the poet, and I suppose the songwriter too, when we're at our best, we're trying to let you discover that stuff in the spaces, in the in-between parts, give you just enough to take you by the hand and bring you somewhere, and then let you look around and take what you want from it. And we might try to be as clever as possible in standing you at the vantage point where we know you'll see a certain thing that we want you to see. But to me, songwriting and poetry too, for that matter, that's an art form where it's not just a static thing on the part of the person taking it in. The person who's listening to the song is also creating it at the moment they're hearing it. Because you'll ask somebody, what did that song mean to you? And if you ask 5 people, you'll get 5 different answers. That's a beautiful thing to me, because they're all kind of in on the creative process. It doesn't finish when you finish the song, because it keeps happening as people listen to it.
Right. And I love what you said about, the art form taking place in the in-between, because that's my favorite place for art to take place, if that makes sense. Uh-huh. Anything I create, I try to place there and just see it from the inside out. And I hope that the listeners or the viewers, because I'm a filmmaker as well, take from that what they will. But yeah, your love of language, I want to bring it back there. I kind of want to know, where did that begin for you? Did it come from a love of books, a love of poetry, all of the above? And because I know we've talked about this with Walt Wilkins and others, how much literature, defines their writing. And so what does that mean to you?
Definitely from prose writers, from fiction writers. I read a lot of short stories, especially as a kid. And I'm a kid of the 60s. So I grew up with the space program, and science fiction was my entree into literature, But there were some great authors at work in those times. Kurt Vonnegut and Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, with wonderful, amazing imaginations. So I think it was a great place to start. And then later on, I would discover people like William Gibson, the cyberpunk guy, and Lucius Shepard, who wasn't quite as well known, but to me, really brilliant, and kind of wrote like poetry, somewhere in between fantasy and hard science, and
right, yeah,
just beautiful writing. So those guys got me falling in love with storytelling and reading stories and how language is used that way. I remember reading a short story by Lucius Shepard where he talks about on the first page, I think, where the sunlight was scattered on the lawn like gold coins. And it's like, wow, I love that. It just, you're right in the moment. And it's like, I want to write like that.
Yeah, one of my favorite authors is John Irving. His approach to writing is knowing the final line of a book, the ending sentence, and then also the first sentence, and then filling in the blanks in between. So that's always been something that I've done. When I read an interview with him saying the same thing, I was like, oh, damn, I didn't know other people did that. Like, immediately flip to the end of the book, just read the last sentence, and then also the art of creating that first sentence. And that's just something that was always important to me. And a lot of that always has led to how I approach lyric writing as well, knowing that first line is the first thing that listeners are going to hear, and how important that is.
You got to grab them with the first line. Yeah, you got to make it interesting.
For sure. You brought up William Gibson as well, and just his approach to detail is unparalleled. So I can see where reading authors like that took you to a place where you're just able to connect on that detailed level. It's really exciting.
But later on too, authors like Hemingway or John Irving, like you mentioned, like Hemingway was not super flowery, and he didn't use a lot of adjectives. He just kind of laid it out there in a really basic way. But it's what he chose to point out, the moments. In a way, he and John Prine are kind of kindred spirits to me, because John, he always told these amazing stories in very plain language, and yet the way he told the story was really profound. He didn't need a lot of 8-syllable words to get the point across, or he was able to use everyday language to convey these amazing, wonderful, deep ideas.
Exactly. Yeah. And we brought up Cormac McCarthy on our last episode.
Oh, love him. Yeah.
He's another one that uses simplicity to the highest form, highest level.
Y'all gonna make me read Blood Meridian, dude. Like, it's like third time we've mentioned this book on this pod now. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to read it. Yeah. It's a must read.
A gentle story.
I feel like what's kind of jumping out to me now is I keep going back to these two different songs, start and end of an album, just like the first line and last line of a book. And what I feel like maybe one of those, as Jimmy mentioned, the in-betweens, right? I tend to think of these as sort of like liminal times and liminal spaces, you know, like sometimes when I wake up, when I first wake up, I feel like that is the time when I have my most honest ideas. And there's like maybe the most tendency to sort of connect and free associate things that might not have been ever connected. I feel like maybe one of the, like when you were coming up with those lines for The Dark, perhaps those lines came out of a liminal space, but the other one sounds like you were walking around awake and observing.
Yeah.
You know, could you maybe, I don't know if there's anything you could tease out of that cognitively during the first few lines coming to you for The Dark versus where you were as a sort of waking observer during the first few lines of Mud, you know?
Well, it's kind of your job, I think, as a songwriter, or can be, is to find your way back to that feeling you have in that blurry border between waking and sleeping and waking, you know, where you kind of let your brain think sideways, kind of. We were so used to thinking linearly, right?
Yeah.
Then this, and that leads to this, and on and on. I think the best songwriters are really great, and this goes back to that kind of cleverness that Jason Isbell has, or a guy like John Prine, or Guy, you know, where I think the best of them, they're able to connect things that you don't necessarily think of them as connected. And they're able to jump sideways from one thought to another instead of just following the logic. It's funny, sometimes, I give songwriting workshops sometimes, and I'll talk about rhyme schemes. And you can get really stuck in a rhyme scheme sometimes where you can't, it really limits the possibilities, if you have to rhyme this line with this other one. But sometimes it can actually, trying to find a rhyme when it's difficult, I'll just write a bunch of words in the margin, rhyming words, whatever, not thinking about how they might relate. But sometimes I'll find one that seems unrelated, but it takes me on this weird, wonderful journey, like how could I get to that word from where I started? And it can take you on a really interesting kind of fun journey along the way, and an unexpected turn in the path of the narrative or of the description or whatever. I like that. And to me, that kind of thinking sideways thing that's when you're able to do that, that's where the magic is.
Yeah, I love that expression, thinking sideways. The closest sort of analogy that I have towards taking your brain and moving it back to that in-between sleep and in-between waking sort of, I don't know what you call that self-state of where you're somewhat approaching that in-betweenness, the liminal space. I personally, I get a lot of enrichment out of philosophy because I feel like philosophy is, like, at its core, it can kind of be the art of slowing one's thoughts down. And so when you talk about, you mentioned we're so used to thinking of time linearly, and I don't want to get too highfalutin with this, but I just want to say that even just the concept of making your brain think of time spatially instead of linearly will do well for your metaphoric sort of agility in your writing. And like, if for listeners, if you in philosophy, you're never going to read something, you're always revisiting something, right? Which means you just kind of pick up a book and you're revisiting it, right? And if you want two really good philosophical works that can help sort of create these sort of brain inversions that we're speaking of, one is Henri Bergson, who was a philosopher that spoke about time and how we should interpret it spatially. And he's the guy that really hammers on thinking of time in terms of duration and not anything linear. And then there's also Gilles Deleuze with Capitalism and Schizophrenia. Basically, he talks about, and this is where you talk about thinking sideways and connecting many disparate things. We tend to, as human beings, have like certain siloed off domains of how we think. So we have like the realm of politics that we don't connect to like the realm of, the interpersonal or something, or we have all of these different areas that, and part of the exercise I think of waking up in the morning and free associating is eliminating some of these barriers. And so Gilles Deleuze in Capitalism and Schizophrenia advocates for creative thinking, that we should think more along the lines of a schizophrenic that does not hesitate to combine all these disparate silos. And his books, 1,000 Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus, both part of a dual volume set, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, are seen as philosophical manifestos for creativity.
Wow.
So if you just pick these books up, you don't have to read them from start to finish, but if you just revisit these books and take a couple paragraphs of these, it can sit with you. And then that can help your brain kind of do these inversions or think sideways or slow your thoughts down. And so I just wanted to, and I'm done with all that now, the philosophy stuff. But yeah, so go ahead.
Capitalism of Schizophrenia. That's also the title of my autobiography. But
right.
Yeah.
Put those in the chat for anybody who's interested.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely put those in the show notes.
Cool.
Joel, send those to me. So
yeah, I've always wanted to do kind of a philosophy-informed songwriting sort of clinic in a way of like, how can these things help us be better writers? Because so much of it is not necessarily like just like writing in general. We think that it's our choice of words that makes our writing more interesting, when it's not really our choice of words, it's our rhythm that we've established. So like in terms of songwriting, it's not that we're looking for different words that rhyme all the time in a rhyme dictionary. It's actually just getting back to that liminal space between waking and observing, where we find the thoughts that are poetically generative. And if for writers that need help with that sort of stuff, maybe that's what separates sort of the innate writers that have an instinct for that sort of stuff, man. Maybe some of us gravitate towards that area more naturally than others, perhaps. And it's not that we can't learn to do that. It's just that, and it's conversations like this with you, Buddy, that point out that where the magic lies is in this delicate space that cannot be got at directly, that one must palpate for like a doctor, where you can't see inside the patient, but you have to palpate for it. Which that, even that word palpate, is it's a Deleuzian term. Gilles Deleuze, he uses that.
Buddy,
yeah.
You woke up Jules. I apologize. He
yeah. So
I think we got him into that liminal space there.
I know. He's going to write 3 songs today. But no, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jules. No.
I'm pretty done, dude.
I just saw how passionate you were talking about this. It's like, wow.
Well, this is stuff that, like, I think a lot on these terms of like a lot of like, how do we get to a place where we can just get a single damn line? When I go out and shoot photos, I'm never looking for like 12. I'm looking for 1, and I might take 3,000, and I'm going to sift through all those things, but I'm really looking for 1. Because like every songwriter, you write your song, and then you have like perhaps an overinflated valuation of that song when you first complete it. And as a writer, when you get older, you learn to sort of downplay those expectations, because you had your heart broken and expectations, disappointment. If you're going to be a songwriter, like a lot of this is just dealing with disappointment, and then you got to go write about that disappointment, because that's what moves people, is you write about this stuff. But yeah, man, I would just say that you write these songs and not all of them stick, not all of them make them into your back pocket that you're going to pull out at every gig. And so like, how do we get to that place where we can get 1 line that leads to 1 song that leads to like, that's the first song you pull out of your back pocket, So that's, and I think it's, like I said, man, it's like, it's not a matter of our choice of words. It's a matter of like finding that 1 generative line. Just even like, I think of like the first line in Poncho and Lefty, stuff like that starts out a story in such a way that it just, 1 line sets the scene, and then it becomes sort of a signature where like it evokes an entire emotion that comes with that first line. If you write that first line well enough, then it ends up being like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. You already know what that is. It already evokes the feeling. You're already there. And like, you're there in Dickinsville already. But yeah, so I don't know, when I think of certain songs that bring an affect with them, these are some of the songs at the top of my list, man, of Mud and The Dark, because they're trying to get at something that can't be got at directly. And so I've looked at them as works that support and affirm a quality of writing that can be reached through a philosophical investigation that can, and we talk about books all the time on this podcast, and it's like the more you read, that good reading makes good writing. And the thing is, you just have to keep on reading until that reading bleeds into your writing. It's like what you listen to bleeds through your writing and your stuff. And so, like, you know, I listened to bluegrass for years, and it finally started coming out. You know, it finally started showing up in the way that I play. I read Dante for years. It's finally coming out in the stuff that I write now. But yeah, however we can get back to that liminal space. I'm hijacking this entire platform in this podcast. I feel like ranting here. So this is a Buddy Mondlock interview. This isn't a So Buddy, anyway, share your thoughts with us, please. Somebody else. Yeah.
Do you have any follow-up thoughts on that, Buddy?
Well, you mentioned Pancho and Lefty. I was just thinking, you know, how brilliant he was. Living on the road, my friend, was going to keep you free and clean. So that's Townes right there. I mean, he's talking about himself, really. Now you wear your skin like iron, your breath's as hard as kerosene. Boom, you're in. You know, it's like you're slayed already in the second line. It's in the, you know, by the fourth line of the song. Yeah, I love stuff like that. I don't know where I was going to go with that, but you just got me thinking about Townes.
I mean, we have to take a moment just to appreciate the brevity of Townes Van Zandt. But to kind of steer this in another direction, I've been wanting to ask you, how did the collaboration between Art Garfunkel and Maya Sharp take place? Yeah,
that was such a cool project to end up being involved in. My manager, Bob, co-manager, he had met this guy in New York, a Philadelphia guy, but he was in New York, named Billy Mann, who's a songwriter and producer. Just, you know, more energy in that guy than almost anybody I've ever met. One of those people who's just got a million ideas and they're pouring out all the time. And
right.
So he encouraged Billy to come check out Nashville and meet some people, and I think he played me, you know, some of my stuff for Billy. Anyway, Billy came and we hit it off, and we wrote 3 songs in 3 days. That's a miracle for me. And then he went away again, and in the meantime, he'd been playing at this tennis club. This the story goes that I got, and Art Garfunkel was a member there too. And he and Art got to be friends. Billy's a really gregarious guy, and he got the call one day saying that Art's people called Billy and said, it's time for Art to make a new record and we want you to produce it. And Billy, you know, thought it through and he said, okay, I'll do that, but I want this to be a little different. I want Art to be involved in the songwriting this time. You know, in the Simon and Garfunkel stuff, he was beautiful, creative harmony singer and musician in that way, but not writing the songs. Paul Simon kind of commandeered that role.
Yeah.
And Billy thought that there was a songwriter hiding inside of Art, and he wanted to bring that guy out. And he thought of me, thought I might be a good songwriting partner for Art, and also that he thought our voices would blend well together just on tape. Talking about it, it quickly became clear that it really should not be some kind of a duo project with Art Garfunkel and this unknown guy. You know, if we're gonna get some unknown people or relatively unknown people involved in this, it would make more sense to do it as a trio. And we kicked some names around, and Maya's record, it was floating around the office. She had an unreleased record that Bob Doyle had gotten a copy of, and he gave it to me to listen to one day, and I stole it from him. I just played it in my car all the time because it was so great. Maya Sharp she's just a natural in so many ways. A great musician, horn player and keyboard player and guitarist too, and this voice that can do anything, and really beautiful songwriter. So her name came up, and we're all like, yeah, if Maya would do this, that would be perfect to get the 3 of us working together on this project. And she luckily agreed to it. Billy, I think, knew her already because he had been at some song retreat in France at a castle or something where they get a bunch of writers and artists together and they write songs and record them for a week or something, and she was at one of those. So yeah, that's how it all came together. Billy really was the impetus. Billy kind of brought us all three together. But Art was game for the project. He, God bless him, he's like, okay, going to do something brand new here and see what that brings.
And was Billy right? Was there a songwriter living within Art? How did that go?
Definitely. The whole idea of writing songs and the process was kind of new to him, but very creative person. He had a book of poetry that had come out some years before. Right. And Billy even suggested, before you meet Art for the first time, go find his book of poems and see if you can find a starting place for a song in one of those poems. If you could have a song that he's already a co-writer on when you first meet, that would go miles toward making this happen. So I did just that. And that's how the song Perfect Moment was born.
Yeah, it's such a good song.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. And a lot of the lines in that song are from the poem, and I got to a certain place with it, and then I kind of felt bogged down, and I had a writing appointment set up with Pierce Pettis already, who I'm a great admirer of Pierce, and we kind of came up together on the folk scene, and so I brought this idea I had, and yeah, the two of us finished it off. So I had that to play for Art when I first met him. He liked it, luckily.
That's great. Have you heard this record, Jules?
I have not. I just met Buddy and woke up an hour ago.
It's called Everything Waits to Be Noticed. Mm-hmm. And it's me and Art and Maya Sharp. And in some ways, it's still waiting to be noticed. But some interesting people have noticed it, like yourself.
Yeah, I discovered it through. Every year when I'm doing the festival, I put together a Spotify playlist to help promote the festival. And for anybody that wants to get to know the artists that are performing, the Spotify playlist is there. And so I was going through your whole repertoire on Spotify, and I discovered that record, and it just blew me away that a lot of these songs on there. Did you help co-write a good chunk of those? The
way that album was written is we would get together three at a time. So, and one was always Art. So it'd be me and Art and Maya, or Art and Maya and Billy Mann. Billy was involved in the writing too. And often, we would start with one of the poems in the book. That was kind of a cool way to have our way in for the song and to involve Art from the very beginning of the process. But it wasn't, like simply putting music to the words of the poem. Poems and songs, while they're related, are different animals, A lot of new lyric writing had to go into all that, and making the form right to fit a song format rather than just a poem, which tends to be a little more free form than songs do. Songs have, I think, more of a structure, at least, than modern poems,
Right.
It was a really fun process, and Art would be right in there, all the way, not just by contributing some lines from a poem that he'd written years ago, but he'd be right part of the process as we're hashing it all out and singing melody lines too to go with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really, really fun to work that way.
I bet. I mean, honestly, I bet that contributed a lot to just the inspiration of being in the room with just three of you, or Billy on occasion. Mm-hmm. I just can imagine what that project was like. I'll be putting that record as in the show notes as well as one to listen to, because it is really good. So
thanks. It was, it really is a collaboration of the three of us. It's not a record I would have made by myself. That's for sure. Yeah.
And that's what's so, amazing about projects like that. It draws new things out of, I'm guessing, each of you. So.
Yeah. Well, and I say three of us, really four of us, because Billy was very much a creative force on that, not just getting it on tape, but kind of guiding it and writing some of the songs. And yeah.
It's amazing. So tell me a little bit about your new single coming out soon, Girls Town.
Yeah. I wrote that with a young woman named Chelsea Ewing. Well, younger than me anyway. She's a friend of my wife's, and Polly, my wife, actually got the idea for us to sit down together, because I've been doing this thing the last few years where I've been part of this program that puts veterans and songwriters together, particularly veterans with PTSD. And there's, it's thought that there's some kind of therapeutic value of, taking these events and working them into art some way, And boy, it sure seems from my observations of, how it works out for the vet, it just really seems like a powerful thing for them. And it certainly is for me, to be trusted with what they're talking about and what their experiences and stuff. So anyway, I've been doing that for a few years, and, it has to do with interpreting trauma, basically. As Chelsea and Polly got to know each other better, kind of came out that Chelsea had been arrested as a teenager. Like some kid she knew in school had said, "Hey, would you hide this in your locker for me?" And it was some kind of drugs. And next thing she knows, she's in jail and in court, and bang, the gavel goes down and she's convicted. And ended up getting sent to reform school. So it changed her whole, from this kind of easygoing kid to suddenly she's, a jailbird at 13. It really affected how she felt about herself after that, too, and how she went through life. And, that was a trauma for her. And Polly said, well, maybe if you and Buddy sit down, that experience and how you feel about it can maybe turn into a song. So that's exactly what we did. We took her experience and kind of worked it into some music and a story, So that's the single. And I really love the song. And recently there was a podcast on NPR called The Kids of Rutherford County. Mm-hmm. About this judge in a county just outside of Nashville, actually here in Tennessee. And this judge had this huge ego and had decided the best thing for any kid was to have to spend the night in jail or longer if possible. So any kid that came into her court got thrown in jail. And word went out to the police departments in the area, like, take them. They built this brand new facility to house juveniles who run across the police. And somehow it's like, take them to jail, take them to jail, take them to jail. And it kind of came out this one young public defender. It's like, well, the statutes clearly say, that you cannot send this kid to jail. And she was like, I'm deciding what I can do in this courtroom. This is my courtroom. And, so this whole story came out about this judge in Tennessee here who was really using jail time to impose her will on the kids of this county in Tennessee. And it's a fascinating story. And Chelsea's story just had so many parallels to that. So I thought, with that podcast just coming out, I should release the single too. Yeah. Got in the studio with Brad Jones, who produced my most recent album. Love working with Brad. I've been a huge fan of his for a long time. And so it was another chance to work together and kind of got it down in a day. And it's coming out on Friday this week.
Oh, wonderful.
Mm-hmm. It's called, what's it called? It's called Girls Town.
Are you in the works of a full album, or is it just this one single?
For now, it's one single, but who knows? This may be the start of the next record.
There you go.
I always made records like, all right, I'm going to go in the studio to make a whole album. And that doesn't seem to be the way that people are doing it these days. Nowadays, it seems like it's single. And then maybe once you get enough of them, see which ones are the most popular and make that a record,
That's definitely something I'm still wrapping my head around, because I've always thought in terms of albums. So trying to, play the game of singles has been, an uphill battle for me.
I'm into like, all right, let's try this. And come to think of it, back in the day, some of the best known Beatles songs weren't from albums. They were just singles that came out.
That's very true. Very true.
I don't know if you feel like this sometimes, man, but like you mentioned that, one of your co-writers had a traumatic experience with an early childhood event of, getting arrested, thrown in jail. And then you mentioned that the songwriting for veterans thing, and that tells me about a sort of trauma-informed way of working with these veterans and the way that I'm wondering, do you ever feel like the line that comes to me out of that is like 41 days, 41 nights, 41 years with ball and stripes. It's like, it just seems so callous and over the top and out of touch with like the sensibilities we're speaking of here of like, trauma-informed ways of working and being. But do you ever feel like you're cobbling together stuff like sort of vulgarly that like out of someone's very tender experience kind of thing, it's like we are taking these experiences that are tender and the end result is we create something emotive and touching and affects people's lives. And it's but in the meantime, it's like, we're cobbling together stuff that just like the last Doc Watson line is like, it seems kind of callous, it seems a little just not in touch with the tenderness at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the awareness I have to have doing that kind of work. It's not about me, and it's not even about the song necessarily. It's about the vet and what's going to be the most useful to them. So typically, the way I work with them is we'll just sit down and talk for a whole afternoon, on a Tuesday or a Saturday or something. And then and I'll just take notes and ask questions and kind of let them talk about whatever they want to talk about. But I might start to ask more specific questions as we go, as I start to get ideas. And then I'll go home and work on it probably half the night and see what I come up with. But then the next morning, we get together again, and I'm like, hey, does this feel like you? Does this ring true for you, or is there something that seems false, or I'm hitting the wrong note here emotionally? Am I not getting the point? Have I gotten what you were telling me? I'm really just trying to distill the conversation we had basically and their experience into, kind of organize it in a way that becomes a song. So yeah, things change sometimes. Even if I feel like I finished the song the night before, things often change the next morning when I play it for them. And sometimes, I did my job and got it right in the first place. But it's always, I never play it out until they've weighed in on it and, what feels right. And I'm, trying to ask specific questions about that too, and make sure they know that they're not shy about wanting to change something or anything.
Right. That's wonderful. So I wanted to know a little bit about you've met Michael McNevin in the past.
Yeah, we're old pals. We just got along famously right from the start.
Yeah, he was. You came highly recommended by him. So I just want to know. Great. And being that y'all are going to perform together at the festival, February 18th to close it out, what is that relationship like? Have y'all co-written together or just performed together?
Oh, we're always goofing around with each other. I think we've only written one song together, and hopefully we'll do that one. Yeah, Michael, he's got this beautiful voice for one, and so I'm hoping I'll get some harmonies out of him. I just love his storytelling too. He's a master storyteller with his songs. Right. We first met at this. It was a tour called Internet Quartets, and it was in the early days of people getting online basically and having their home computers. And Alan Roweth put it together, and he got these 3 or 4 groups of 4 songwriters and sent them out on the road, and we all did the same 12 gigs in a row, basically. It was really great that he put it all together. And Michael and I ended up as one of those 2 out of the 4 people in one of those groups that went out. Ellis Paul was the third, and David Cantor and Kelly Flint was the other act that was on the thing. But we had so much fun, just stuffed into a car together for a couple of weeks and really got to know each other. And Mike's got a great goofy sense of humor too. And yeah, we just right from the start hit it off.
That's great. I was looking up this song that I think y'all co-wrote together. Was it Nowhere to Somewhere? Is that it? Yeah. Can you tell me a little about that song and how did that process go?
I think Mike had the beginnings of that song. He had the first couple of lines, and we just both, sort of tried to put ourselves into the place of this guy wandering a landscape and seeing these little things along the way, and how the things that he saw kind of related to a relationship in their own kind of weird ways. Right. The rain was hitting the dust and bouncing up on the wall, and guys in the diner and the waitress, and just that idea of going from nowhere to somewhere, that just seemed really wide open for telling a story and being really open to interpretation too. It can mean so many things, that phrase, nowhere to somewhere. So we wrote it in an afternoon, and Mike had this great, he's a really good guitar player, and he had this great complicated and fast internal rhythm of a finger picking thing that he plays through the song. I've tried to do it, and I'm not quite quick enough.
Right. And am I correct that he kind of invented or did his own little tuning thing for this.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's a tuning I'd never run across before, and I think he just randomly found it one day.
Yeah, that's one of the most complex guitar picking things I've heard in a long time.
I know, he's brilliant.
But all right, I've got one more. My question: do you have any follow-ups, real quick, Jules?
Man, I feel like I could talk all day here, and ask all sorts of abstract questions and stuff, man. I just the last sort of question is, you strike me as a very zen dude, buddy. Like, you strike me as a guy who sort of has a strong internal compass that has, you like all of us who get involved with this sort of thing, you get swept up at a young age, you get introduced to some of your heroes, maybe you write with them, but it's kind of it's a story that's being written you don't know the ending to in real time, and that feeling strikes everybody a little bit differently, Mm-hmm. I mean, I play a lot of chess, and I say it's never too late to hang your rook sort of thing, but you must necessarily go through that swept upness, and you must necessarily go through these encounters to arrive at this place, and so, like, just wonder, like, if there's I don't know, man, like, could you maybe speak a bit? I know it's a big question and asking for some kind of brevity at the end of an episode, but, like, speak towards your experiences as a whole, like the swept upness and where you've gotten, and some of the things that have helped you stay steady on your career path and on your writing path. Like, what helps you kind of stay consistent down the middle of the lane? Yeah,
it's interesting. You going back earlier to what John Irving said about knowing the first line and the last line. For me, I never know the last line when I stumble on the first line. There comes a point in the songwriting where I realize where I'm headed, But for me, the wonder of it is to not know where I'm going along the way and discover it as I go. And I think my career, in some ways, my career has been like that. I didn't set out with an ambition to make a record with Art Garfunkel. I never dreamed something like that would happen. But I just kept saying yes to things that put me in the right place at the right time. And, I kept, I think, true to my own, like, this is what feels good to me. I didn't just get to Nashville and start trying to copy whatever was on the radio. And I was lucky, having Guy sort of sponsoring me here. It's like they kind of left me alone and just let me do my thing because he was so well respected here. So that was really lucky for me. I mean, nobody was saying, well, you got to shorten this, and the hook has to come up in the first 4 lines and blah, blah, blah. They just let me do my thing. So that didn't always, turn into, I didn't become, this multi-millionaire with hit records on country radio. I kind of, I always sort of pictured myself as a folk singer, like my heroes, Steve Goodman and John Prine, and other people I heard at the Earl of Old Town in Chicago, where I kind of got started. And I always kept doing that. It wasn't like I'm only going to feel fulfilled if I get a big record deal and, fill a stadium or something like that. And, truthfully, I got to feel a little bit of what that's like on a, somewhat larger scale anyway, with doing that thing with Art. We got to tour on a bus, and it was a different way of going about the business, going out on the road with him. I'm still happy to be in a room with 25 people who are really listening. That's where the joy comes, when you connect with people that way. So yeah, I've had my ups and downs in terms of making a living. Like I professed to Guy, I just want to keep making music and make a living out of it some way. And some years have been better than others, but it sure has been an amazing journey along the way. Part of it is just saying yes over and over again. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I had never pictured myself in Nashville. I just thought, oh, that's country music. I don't like country. It's all corny stuff. I don't. That's not me. But I met Guy, and I started talking to people down here, and took my first trip. And it's like, oh, it's not the place I thought it was. Really, songwriting is a lot more important here, and not just country songs. I thought maybe this is the place for me. So that was, saying yes to the opportunity as it came up, even though I hadn't pictured it before. And I feel like, the luckiest person I know, you know.
That's beautiful. So we always end our interviews with a final question, and it's from the movie Almost Famous. I don't know if you know that movie. Some people do, some people don't.
Yeah, I've seen it.
But that movie ends with the protagonist asking this question, and I like asking it because everyone's answer is always completely different, but also just as simple as the question is, it garners the most deepest of answers, if that makes sense. So, Buddy, what do you love about music?
I love the surprises. I love the surprises about music. You know, when the turn of phrase takes me in a direction I completely hadn't expected, or the chord change comes in that's like, oh, wow, that's not where I thought it was going. Or it does go there and then goes there again. And then again, you know, I'm like, oh, he's beating on it, but now it's starting to mean something else. You know, I think for me, that's what I love about music, is the surprises and the way music is like these two art form songs, or these two different art forms coming together as one thing. And I love that too.
That's perfect. Perfect. Well, where can we catch you next? I know you'll be at the festival, like we said, on February 18th. Is there anything in between?
Yeah. I'm kind of off right now, but my first gigs are coming up in Rolla, Missouri on Friday, the 9th of February. And then the next day in St. Louis, Focal Point. And my old pal Mike is going to be playing bass with me on both of those. And
Awesome.
I think we'll have actually a trio in St. Louis. What else do I got coming up? A few things. You can see my calendar at good old buddymondlock.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Buddy. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to speak with us. It's been an enlightening conversation.
For me too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, buddy. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Jules.
Yeah, wait to see you once again in person this February.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait
All
to
right.
be down in Corpus again.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.